To label 1995 a turning point for anime would not do it justice. 1995 stands as a fracture in time, a clear demarcation between what anime had been and what it was about to become. Japan stood at a crossroads, caught between a nostalgic past and an uncertain future. The economic bubble had burst years ago, but the country was still bleeding. The embers of a once glorious decade smoldered in the collective memory, casting a haunting glow over a nation struggling to find its footing. What remained was a heavy, depressive atmosphere defined by economic stagnation, social unease, and a quiet national mood of simply trying to rebuild what once was piece by piece. It was precisely this atmosphere, raw, disoriented, and searching, that gave anime the perfect conditions to birth some of the most profound and monumental works the medium had ever seen. Pop culture in 1995 Japan was vibrant, if a bit conflicted. In cinema, Shunji Iwai's love letter touched hearts across the nation, praised widely for its poetic visuals and emotional depth. Meanwhile, Godzilla vs. Dostoria dominated the box office, becoming Japan's top-grossing domestic film of 1995 with a reported 13.1 billion yen in revenue, equivalent to roughly 10.5 million admissions. The film's massive success highlighted the appetite for grand-scale spectacle, standing in contrast to the quieter, emotional introspection seen in other media that year. Meanwhile, Sony's PlayStation, released just months earlier in December 1994, was quietly revolutionizing the gaming world. With its advanced 3D graphics and expansive library of games, it quickly became a fixture in Japanese living rooms. But the tech shift wasn't limited to just consoles. The release of Windows 95 and the growing accessibility of home internet signaled the dawn of a more connected, digitized Japan, reshaping not only entertainment, but the way people related to each other and to the world. And abroad, anime was beginning to finally break through. What had once been niche imports were gaining traction as the West started to wake up to the emotional and visual power of Japanese animation. Anime-themed conventions began cropping up across Europe and North America, driven by the rising tide of what would soon be known globally as otaku culture, a fandom-led movement that would come to define the international face of anime itself. And all of this vibrant creativity was set against the contrast of some deeply unsettling events which would soon reveal to Japan the unraveling of its own collective psyche. On January 17th, the Great Hanshin Earthquake devastated Kobe, claiming thousands of lives and shaking Japan's collective sense of security. Then, just 2 months later, on March 20th, the country was shaken to its core once again, this time by the Aum Shinrikyo called sarin gas attack on the Tokyo subway system. The assault left behind a deep national trauma, forcing Japan to confront its growing isolation, economic anxiety, and the dangerous allure of extremist ideologies. While the attack was domestic in origin, it mirrored a broader wave of global unrest. In Japan, it laid bare the psychological fallout of the economic bubble, a generation of disaffected young men and women, left drifting in lonely, uncertain circumstances, not of their own making. Many turned inward, seeking meaning, identity, and community in increasingly unstable places. Internationally, violence, cults, and apocalyptic obsession had become cultural fixtures. These new religious movements coincided with the rise of 24-hour news networks, which saturated the airwaves with constant, rolling dread. Civil unrest, genocide, and the specter of war accumulated into a global atmosphere of unease, a generation waiting for the world to just end. These unsettling events deeply permeated Japan's cultural consciousness, creating fertile ground for a new wave of introspective storytelling in anime. 1995 was stacked with remarkable anime. Studio Ghibli offered the gentle beauty of Whisper of the Heart, a sincere, heartfelt tale of youthful aspiration. The Slayers brought fantasy comedy to new heights, while Golden Boy proved hilariously cheeky, yet deceptively insightful. And finally, Gundam Wing stormed onto screens and into our hearts, introducing the West to Japan's love for giant robots, particularly through Toonami's later broadcast. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it broadened anime's global reach significantly. arguably becoming the best-selling Gundam series ever released. But out of all these landmark titles, Mamoru Oshii's Ghost in the Shell emerged as perhaps the strongest contender for the year, a visually mesmerizing exploration of consciousness and digital anxiety. It's worth pausing here to emphasize just how fiercely Ghost in the Shell competed for title of 1995's definitive anime. Mamoru Oshii's cyberpunk masterpiece is nothing short of groundbreaking. Its mesmerizing visuals, cerebral narrative, and haunting exploration of consciousness and identity forever changed anime's place in global cinema. Without Ghost in the Shell, we might never have had The Matrix, and cyberpunk anime may never have gained the international credibility it enjoys today. This was more than just a stunning visual experience. It was an anime staking a bold claim on philosophical storytelling. And viewers at home, we'll be honest, passing over a titan in anime like Ghost in the Shell was no easy call. But while Ghost in the Shell profoundly shaped its genre and echoed through global pop culture, it ultimately did not redefine anime as a medium the way one very special anime did, that coincidentally debuted the same year. If Ghost in the Shell defined the cyberpunk genre, then one title rewrote the rules of anime itself. You probably already know what it is. Cue the music, please.
残酷な天使のように少年よ神話になれ
It's hard to put into words just how significant Neon Genesis Evangelion was for the medium of anime. Even today, this 26-episode masterpiece continues to cast a long shadow. It fundamentally altered the timeline, and nearly everything that came after it can be interpreted as a direct descendant of this one work. In fact, its influence is so deep yet so personal that in order for us to truly understand Evangelion, we must first understand the man behind it. So naturally, the story of how Evangelion came to be begins with its creator. Neon Genesis Evangelion was the brainchild of Hideaki Anno at Studio Gainax. Remember him from 1990? In fact, one could go so far as to say Evangelion was Hideaki Anno, at least for a brief wrinkle in time. And as we'll soon come to understand, Anno would become one of the very first auteurs of the anime genre. The origin story of Neon Genesis Evangelion is one of the most fascinating and psychologically complex creations in anime history. It's a rare case where an anime was born not from commercial strategy, but from a deep personal crisis, cultural timing, and the right industry relationships. After directing Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water, Anno fell into a 4-year-long depressive spiral. He became deeply disillusioned with both the anime industry and with himself. He described this period as a time of isolation and withdrawal from society. During this time, he questioned not only his career, but his purpose, an existential theme that would become the core emotional engine of Evangelion. In his own words, "I started to wonder if animation even had a future, or if I did." But the reality of the situation was that Studio Gainax needed a hit. The indie anime studio co-founded by Anno in the 80s had grown respected in the industry for its works like Gunbuster, Nadia, and Wings of Onamis, but the studio was financially unstable, and by the early 90s, they desperately needed a new original work to survive. Anno proposed a sci-fi series involving robots, children, and the fate of the world. You know, your typical run-of-the-mill mecha anime, but with a twist. Anno brought the idea to TV Tokyo, a relatively new player in anime broadcasting, and to King Records, a record company looking to expand its media ventures. King Records executive Toshimichi Utsuki was instrumental in championing the project. He gave Anno significant creative freedom, betting that a darker, more complex robot series could break through the saturated 90s anime landscape. He bet right. The budget was relatively small, but Anno got the green light, and what's more, Gainax retained complete autonomy over the production, and so, in 1993, EVA went into production for a planned 26-episode run. But during production, Evangelion's tone and vision radically evolved. As Anno's mental health fluctuated, the show itself shifted. The first half plays like a stylish, but fairly typical weekly battle mecha anime. But the second half dives into psychological collapse, abstraction, and self-destruction, with only 5 minutes to save the world every single time. During these episodes, Anno essentially put his therapy sessions and internal battles on screen, infusing the series with deeply personal anxieties, traumas, and philosophical questions. According to Anno, Evangelion was my attempt at grappling with my own emotional darkness and the alienation I saw in society. The protagonist, Shinji Ikari, a young boy in the grips of adolescence, was EVA's conflicted protagonist. He embodied the profound isolation and identity crisis many young Japanese felt post-bubble, especially in the wake of tragedies like the Aum Shinrikyo attacks. Shinji was also painfully relatable to many viewers in Japan at the time. He was not brave or heroic, he was vulnerable and very human. To say Evangelion was merely conceived would strip away the very essence of what it truly was, a piece of the darkest part of Anno's soul. A more accurate description would be to say that Evangelion was exorcised and dragged out of Anno, projected onto the screen for viewers to witness in all its raw, unfiltered intensity. It was the soul of a man who had descended into the deepest pits of depression and turmoil, laid bare for all to see through animation. Without the constraints of a pre-established plot or a fan expectation tied to a serialized manga, Evangelion had the freedom to evolve unpredictably. What began as a relatively familiar mech narrative quickly spiraled into a psychologically charged, genre-defying exploration of trauma, identity, and existential dread. By the end of its run, Evangelion had dismantled its own structure, leaving viewers with a raw and experimental final 2 episodes that reflected the creator's inner turmoil more than any external plot logic. His disregard for convention extended to everyone, including his own audience. Viewers expecting closure or narrative clarity were instead met with psychological implosion, delivered as a fever dream in the final 2 episodes. At the time, no one watching was entirely sure what was real. The series had unraveled into something far beyond anime. It had become a direct window into the clouded, chaotic mind of Anno himself. The finale was so polarizing, so disruptive, that to ignore the impact it had on the anime world would be a disservice to you, the viewer. The backlash was swift and intense. Gainax received thousands of angry letters and faxes, including death threats directed at director Hideaki Anno. In response, Anno and Gainax produced The End of Evangelion in 1997, an alternate film ending that reimagined episodes 25 and 26 as full-budget cinematic epics. However, this answer only succeeded in deepening the controversy. It was almost as if Anno, annoyed at his own fans, was retaliating in defiance to their expectations of convention. The End of Evangelion was visually stunning and the narrative absolutely brutal, featuring the violent deaths of major characters, intense psychological breakdowns, and surreal apocalyptic imagery. The film offered catharsis for some, but for others, it was disturbing, nihilistic, and unforgiving. Instead of resolving the controversy, End of Evangelion reframed it. It became Anno's final defiant statement about fans, about humanity, and about art, especially anime. In doing so, it elevated Evangelion from a popular anime into a subject of scholarly debate, philosophical discourse, and artistic reverence. The controversial finale to Evangelion forever rewired what audiences expected from endings altogether. Yet EVA's most unexpected legacy was how it reshaped anime's commercial landscape. Through the explosive popularity of Rei Ayanami and Asuka Langley Soryu, EVA unintentionally birthed what would become modern moe culture, fueling an unprecedented wave of merchandise sales. They were no longer just characters, they were a media empire. Model kits, posters, figures, video games, soundtracks, manga. Evangelion was among the first anime to show how emotionally resonant character design could drive a global merchandising phenomenon. In fact, one could argue that Rei and Asuka, two 13-year-old children used as tools by adults, embodies Anno's critique of how the youth, especially young girls, are exploited for emotional and ideological ends. That same dynamic would later fuel the very hypersexualization and commercialization of young women in anime that Evangelion sought to expose. The central irony, of course, is that despite Anno's clear stance against escapism, his masterpiece became a gateway to it, sparking decades of obsessive fandom both in Japan and abroad, with many retreating from reality through the very work that warned against doing so. Evangelion's success also had an enormous ripple effect on the industry's production model by revolutionizing anime's format. Its tight 26-episode structure became the new golden standard for original series. This format has been followed by countless other animes since, and has set the bar for more concise, impactful storytelling in the years since. In an era when studios chased merchandising empires, every studio suddenly wanted an Evangelion of their own, a commercially viable, auteur-driven series that could succeed without the commitment or baggage of a full-scale long-running adaptation. Its influence is felt in everything from Ra Ziphon, Code Geass, Eureka 7, and Darling in the Franxx, all mecha parallels to EVA. We see it in the way it inspired mental decay and narrative ambiguities, like those in Serial Experiments Lane, Ergo Proxy, Boogie Pop Phantom, and Monster. We see genre deconstruction and dark psychodrama in Puella Magi Madoka Magica, Paranoia Agent, and Revolutionary Girl Utena. And even as recently as Attack on Titan and Demon Slayer, we still see them use the strip it all away by episode 10 approach to escalate stakes beyond shonen norms. On paper, Neon Genesis Evangelion is a mecha anime, but in practice, it was an elegy for the mecha genre. Whereas Gundam framed war as tragic but often heroic, Evangelion reframed combat as personal, biological, and horrifying. The EVA units weren't mechanical marvels, they were grotesque, flesh-covered creatures linked directly to the pilot's nervous systems. Battles left emotional scars, victory never felt like triumph, simply another crisis averted until the next one. In a decade when anime was saturated with power fantasies and moral binaries, Evangelion asked, what if being chosen just made things worse? That question inverted the shonen genre's moral code and invited anime to stop pretending trauma leads to strength, or that adolescence always has a clear purpose. It blurred the lines between heroism and helplessness, the self and the other, mecha and monster, and redefined what anime could say and how it could say it. In conclusion, 1995 was the beginning of the endgame for many, a halfway point to a darker, unknown future. In this cultural crucible, Neon Genesis Evangelion captured society's collective dread, forced introspection on its audience, and became an emotional touchstone for an entire generation. While other titles shined brightly that year, none reframed anime as thoroughly as EVA did. EVA completely rewrote the anime playbook in 1 year. And that's why, without question, Neon Genesis Evangelion stands tall as the definitive anime of 1995.